So let me get started. Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. This is the second version of the Yoda-Brainstorm Cycle. So what is this? What is the Yoda-Brainstorm Cycle? So what we're going to do today is, this is a second level. So what we're going to do is that we're going to do a very quick recap of the method. For anybody who has not watched the video, I recommend everybody to actually watch the main video that is linked here in YouTube, linked here in the Meetup, in order to get a full picture of this method in detail. But we're going to start today by doing a very quick recap of the method. If you have not already done so, let me know in chat if you have watched, if you have attended the Meetup or watched the video, say yes. If you have not, say no. Okay. So here is the plan. I'm going to start by giving a 5-minute overview of the method and then provide a worksheet. I've just put a worksheet in the chat. It summarizes the method in a single page, so you can keep it with you. It's a good kind of reminder. It's a good way to just one-page summary of the whole method. After the overview, I'm going to ask everybody who has attended the Meetup, has been trying out this method or watched the video and has been trying out the method about their experience of using the method. And then I'm going to make 3 points. First, I'm going to talk about why the Yoda cycle works. Second, I'm going to talk about why the Brainstorm cycle works and why they are in that particular order. And then I'm going to talk about higher level points about how do you use multiple Yoda Brainstorm cycles on problems. Okay. Then I'm going to recap what everybody has said about their takeaways. And then we're going to do breakout rooms to discuss it in further detail. And then you can come back, give your takeaways, ask further questions. We really want to kind of chew this subject, make sure that it is digested. That's the purpose of it. So this is a second take on it. All right. So let me go to the overview. It's a very simple method. It has 3 steps. 1, you aim at a tough problem or choose a tough question to answer. Second step, you set a 5-minute timer and you just try to do it as best as you can. Third step, you brainstorm. So let me go through here. This is the spreadsheet that I have, this is the 1-page summary that I have put in the chat, and I'm going to just walk you through it. And you can use it. Give me a second here. Okay. You can use it. Let me just go ahead and mute everybody. Okay. All right. So step number 1. So the purpose here is to see how much thinking you can do in 10 minutes. Okay. Step number 1, choose a tough problem to solve or a tough question to answer. Choose a problem which you think you possibly can't solve in 5 minutes. Okay. Choose a question which is very, very difficult. Okay. Don't, be ambitious. Don't be shy. Just choose a very tough question. Second step is called the Yoda cycle. You set a 5-minute timer and try to actually solve the problem or to answer the question fully in 5 minutes. No, don't just make a plan, actually try to completely solve it. Okay. That's what this is. This comes from the Yoda quote. You either do it or you don't, there's no trying. Okay. So you put your full effort in trying to solve the problem. Okay. Then you keep it aside for a minute or 2. Then come back for the third step, which is called the Brainstorm cycle. Okay. You set the 5-minute timer again. Regardless of whether you think the problem, whether you solve the problem or not, assume that your first attempt failed. Okay. So there are 3 possibilities. You think that your attempt has succeeded, or it has failed, or you don't know. Okay. If you think that it has succeeded, it's particularly important to say, okay, now I thought it would work, but it's not going to work. Let me see what are the alternate ways of solving the problem. Here, you're not trying to solve the problem. You're trying to come up with as many alternate ways as possible. Of course, if you think that it has failed, you need those alternate ways. You know that you need those alternate ways. So you try to come up with as many alternate ways, alternate solutions to the problems as you can in the next 5 minutes. You're not actually trying to solve the problem in this cycle, but trying to brainstorm as many ways of solving the problem as you possibly can. Important thing here is that don't be afraid to include wild or implausible ways. Okay. There is no wrong thing here. You just try to come up with as many different ways as possible. Okay. So that's it. That's all the method is. Okay. And the other tips, etc., we will come back to. So that's a quick, it was even less than 5 minutes. Okay. So now what I want to do is I want to hear from people who have been trying this. Okay. So that's what we are going to do. After which I'll go to 3 other points and go from there. All right. So folks, I really want to know what your experience was. So could you go ahead, if you'd like to share your experience of using this method, go ahead and type exclamation mark in chat. Joe, go ahead. Oh, sorry. Just a second. I need to let everybody unmute. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I think what has, worked for me is the idea that it starts to get at least me thinking about the problem. But it also has exposed a lot of my solutions as not being solutions to the actual problem that I'm solving. So I look at the secondary impacts of my solutions, and I realize that, I really need to start thinking deeper about the problem. It's what is the actual core problem that I'm solving versus, just jumping in and providing a solution with what. So last week was a very good example of something like, evictions.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to go into, I don't want to waste too much time going into detail, but the idea, so, but anyway, the idea is basically that initially I just thought about how people could not be evicted, but it didn't really, due to the COVID crisis, but the idea wasn't necessarily solving the problem that they didn't have a job to go back to pay the rent in the first place. Mm-hmm. So there's this underlying issue. Mm-hmm. So yes, you can pay somebody's rent for the month, but that doesn't solve the problem. So that the first 5 minutes was a solution, mm-hmm. but the core problem was in the next 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. And that's what this helps you do. And it elicits questions ultimately. So that's the power of this technique.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. So folks, you can line up, please line up to talk about what you got from the method so we can talk about this method at a meta level. Okay. Next up is Jeff, followed by Eileen. Jeff, go ahead.
So, Shrikant, I think you'll be very, I know you know what I'm about to say, but I think you'll be very intrigued with its results. So I used a version of this also with some folks who were involved in a very intense situation in a very complex problem. Some folks who were actually down in Georgia trying to win this election. And they went from, they've got this really just, terrible challenge in front of them. And immediately just say, okay, just take a minute and give me your very best solutions. And they did that quickly. There were 2 people. And then we stepped back and said, okay, I added one little thing here in the middle, as in, okay, so what do you think are the benefits to those solutions? And are they actually what you're trying to achieve? Like, is that really the problem you're trying to solve? Is that what you're trying to, get from this? And they said, well, you know what? They reconsidered and said, what we're actually trying to achieve is this, a little bit like Joe's point, okay? And leaping at what they wanted and then being asked, okay, really, what do you get from this, made them reconsider. And they were able to go, if you will, from the general to the specific, and then to the deeper level through that process. Like, generally, what's the problem? What do you think the solution is? Well, maybe not. We're really trying to achieve this. Okay, now what are our options? And what they were discovering, Shrikant, was that form follows function. They were discovering that the form, that the actual thing they were trying to do was a little different than what they thought they were trying to do. And once they could let go of their initial ideas for what they wanted to do and see that it didn't quite get them what they actually wanted, they reconsidered what they wanted. And the approaches they came up with in the second iteration were way better.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. That was fantastic, Jeff. Thank you. Next up is Eileen, followed by Brian. Eileen?
Yeah. So as I told Shrikant earlier, I did the exercise from the video I watched today, and I was like blown away by how amazing that was to make myself do it in 5 minutes as opposed to the last 2 years I've been pondering this question. The difference I'm hearing with the two guys that spoke was that I picked something in my control, like one of my personal issues or problems that really probably had steps to it. So my initial, when I thought it was going to be difficult, it turned out, I guess the 5 minutes made me say, just do it, enough already. And so boom, 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 I went down and I had all these things that turned out not to be solutions, but preparation for coming up with the solution, which was like this little space I found before actually making solving the problem. There was like, what do I need? It was almost, what do I need to solve the problem? And there were like 6 things immediately that if I looked at them, I probably could solve it. Not that I did it, but that, oh my God, this seems so much more reasonable. So I was thrilled just to get that out of the exercise.
Wonderful. Thank you, Eileen. Next up is going to be Brian. If anybody else wants to share, and I encourage you to share what your experience was, so that way we can further talk about this. So Brian, you're next. Brian, you need to unmute. Okay, looks like Brian is away for a moment. Okay, Kevin,
Okay.
Go ahead, Brian.
Okay. Great. Okay. I came initially from the view that this was too simple a method and wouldn't work. Following on from last week, I actually did a what I called a bug list of my life, and all the kind of things which I think are causing problems or could cause problems maybe sometimes. And I listed about 12 of those, which was easier than I thought it was going to be. And then I picked the top 3, what I classed as the top 3, and tried this exercise on it. I have to say that the first 2 times I did it didn't really provide anything new, but amazingly the third one did. It was something which I've considered before, I've worked on before. I've actually been to see medical people about it before and didn't get very far. But using this method, I came up with a couple of interesting new directions to follow.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Next up is Kevin.
I feel like we need to set up, let's say, if your question is bigger, your solution would be kind of the overview, big plan. If a very specific question, maybe much more concrete the solution. So if let's say you make a big plan, then you make iteration. Let's this today one, or you can do after this meetup or do another time. For me, let's every time you cannot, let's see, every time, otherwise you're going to every time go to same issue try to solve. The same like a scratch surface, like similar to Joe's like that. We this time going to do, let's see, instead, let's see at least 3 level, what's the issue, or next time maybe how I can solve the pop-up question, and maybe even advanced. Why I pop out that as issue? Why I use my solution is okay, but how? Yeah, that's my.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kevin. Okay, last chance for anybody else who wants to share their experience of using the method. Okay, you can go ahead and type exclamation mark at a later point too. I'm going to now talk about a couple more things. I'm going to talk about, give me a second, let me share the screen. Okay, so now next we're going to talk about why does this work? Okay, there are 2 steps. So there are 2 steps here. First one is that you're setting up a timer, you're choosing an ambitious purpose, and you're putting an extreme time limit. Okay, like for example, Eileen pointed out, okay, this is a problem that she's not worked on for 2 years. And you're saying, okay, I'm going to try to solve it in 5 minutes. I think what that does is that it actually focuses your mind. It focuses your mind. So why is it that people don't deal with problems? Because they think that there are kind of limitations, arbitrary limitations. They say, okay, how am I going to do this? And those limitations can vary quite a bit. So it removes those limitations on both goals and means. So I think removal of limitations is a very big deal. Give me just a second. There is some sound. Okay. Okay. So firstly, let me come back to the first point. First point is about ambitious purpose. If you actually don't try to do things which are ambitious, you're not going to be able to do much. So I think that's a very simple, it may seem a very simplistic point, but it's a very deep point that if you don't try to do big things, you will not do big things. So firstly, just setting ambitious purpose, this connects to the main theme of outwitting the devil, having a definite purpose. So this is kind of definite, ambitious purpose, okay? The second thing is that the ambition is magnified by saying that I'm going to do it in 5 minutes, okay? The other point about this is that our consciousness is quite powerful. Not just our conscious, but also our subconscious or unconscious. It's quite powerful. And when you set a very definite purpose for it and a time limit, you are always surprised by what you yourself produced, because you would never have thought of those things because they are not in your conscious. The conscious purpose actually activates the unconscious or the subconscious to produce things related to it. The clearer the purpose, the more effective it is in drawing out things from your memory, from your subconscious. The time limit also acts to do the same thing. You're saying, okay, I want to do it now. Second thing is that it also says that it's only 5 minutes. It's a limited commitment. Okay, I'm not asking you to spend the whole day talking about this. Just 5 minutes. Isn't it worth spending 5 minutes on this? It seems like a very small ask. Secondly, people have all kinds of ideas about perfectionism, which stop them in their tracks. This says, okay, I'm just going to do a quick and dirty version. So I don't have to be perfect. I just want to make progress here. Let me just make the progress. So it leaves aside limitations, false standards, and just goes directly for the goal. So it is a way of providing a direction for your system one using the terminology of Daniel Kahneman of your automatic mechanism to produce whatever the best you can. So it stops you from being kind of held back by various things and just gets you going towards the things that you value. And because you're choosing something that you actually value, and again, that's one thing I emphasize, don't choose something which is like a hypothetical or something that would be kind of interesting to solve. No, no, no. Choose something that is actually valuable, because that is going to actually motivate you to do the best you can. Okay. So that's why I think the Yoda cycle works. And folks, we're going to do a Q&A after this. We'll have plenty of time to do that. So you can keep track of all the questions that you have, and we'll get to all of them. Now, let's look at the brainstorm cycle. Okay, so first thing I want to point out is that the brainstorm is done after the Yoda cycle. Normally, the way in which people do this is that when they're trying to do something, they will do brainstorm first, and then they will choose the best solution of that and act on it. Okay. Now, the advantage of doing the Yoda cycle first is that it actually takes all your default mechanisms and puts it out there. And it kind of clears the ground of saying, okay, all the default mechanisms that I had, I've already engaged. Okay. And after having fully discharged your default mechanisms, then you're saying, okay, that did not work. What else is there? So then you're able to actually come up with alternative things, because I think Becky had made the point last time is that otherwise the default solution, whenever you think of something, you always go to your default. Jeff or Joe were talking about that, you basically just come up with solutions and you don't even realize that they're not solutions. You just kind of habitually keep doing stuff. So this is a way of deliberately separating you from your habits, deliberately separating you from your defaults, deliberately telling yourself what you thought was right may be wrong. So you're considering the possibility that you are wrong. And what that does, that's a very deep point, because the human penchant for certainty is very intense and very deep. And letting go of that and saying that, no, I did not, that did not work, even as a hypothetical, frees you up to think of things that were ignored because of the amount of attachment and amount of emotional investment you had in your habitual way of thinking. So that's why brainstorm, after having discharged the habitual method, helps. This allows you to think beyond default solutions, as we've said. Again, saying that, okay, I'm going to think of as many different things as possible in those 5 minutes. So you're not, again, there is a tendency of our subconscious to yearn for the one solution. This is to say, no, look for many. Okay, look for many. So each time you come up with something, okay, so that is covered, it kind of iterating through those multiple paths is like doing a short version of saying, okay, I thought of this one that looked like very good, but okay, no, now I need to think of something else. So it allows you to free yourself again and again and again from whatever comes to your mind to think explicitly at more possibilities. The next point is give yourself permission to be wildly off. Okay. There is a tendency of wanting not to be wrong. This is saying, no, think wildly, think the implausible things, because again, what is plausible and what is not plausible is conditioned by kind of habitual things. So this is a way of kind of shaking that up, of considering possibilities, which at first look ridiculous. And you'd be surprised how many of those things that initially looked ridiculous to you actually turn out to be good solutions, because that ridiculousness was based on all kinds of preconceptions. The other point about this is that when you have done the Yoda and the Brainstorm cycle, you're living with questions. You're living with lots of possibilities, okay, which is a very, productive state of the mind, to be seeing new connections. Okay, so you're living not, if you just stopped at the Yoda cycle, then you would say, okay, I've solved the problem, I'm done. Now you're living with saying, okay, I have one solution which looked like a good solution, plus I have these multiple things. So you can play them against one another. So it's a good way to actually start making connections, start evaluating all of them. So you're leaving with questions. Now what I want to do is I want to step one level higher and saying, okay, this is the basic tool. Now think of this as the element, Yoda Brainstorm Cycle as an element. Now, how can you combine this element? Once, assume that you've been practicing it for some time and you know how to go do this, okay? What are the various ways of combining them and what does that look like, okay? So this is about using multiple Yoda Brainstorm cycles. So the first simple way, and this is one of the things that the CFAR does. I mean, their actual cycle is not Yoda Brainstorm Cycle. Their actual cycle that they talk about in resolve cycles is Yoda Brainstorm Yoda Cycle. So what they say is that you do a Yoda cycle, you do a Brainstorm cycle, and then you pick the best path, potential solution from that brainstorm, and you do a Yoda cycle on that, okay? So that's a way of doing this. So you have one solution, you pick the best of the next solution. So that's one way of building up on it in just single steps. So just 5 more minutes you spend on doing that. Now, for some people, for me, I think the Yoda Brainstorm as a unit works better. But for some people, Yoda Brainstorm Yoda will work better. It depends on whether you like to leave things with a closure or you like to leave things with in an open-ended way, okay? But that is the other option that you have of doing Yoda Brainstorm Yoda all the time as a unit, okay? Next point I want to make is about importance of taking breaks. This is very intense, as you might have observed, okay? And it can be very tiring. So do take breaks in the middle, breaks between Yoda cycle and the Brainstorm cycles are quite productive. If you want to do multiple cycles, taking a break helps. Taking a break is good for just taking rest, but it is also important to kind of recharge your subconscious. Your brain does not stop working on these things. So if you come back, if you sleep on it and come back the next day, you're going to actually be able to do different things. So I want to emphasize the importance of breaks, both as rest, managing the effort, and of generating new ideas simply by letting things percolate in your mind. Next point I want to make is the point about working with others. One of the ways of doing a cycle is with other person, because the other person has a different context. They have different habits, and they may be able to see things that you did not see. So this actually works very well as a brainstorm mechanism of, as Jeff was saying, doing this in a group of saying, hey, this is the problem. What do you think? And you have 3 people or 6 people going through these cycles, coming up with their best solution first, then coming up with multiple ideas, and then bouncing off one another in order to do that. So it works very well at a group level. Now, one of the things that I do is I actually have a timer. I I've experimented with different kinds of timers, and I have this thing called interval timer over here. Now I find you have to also, you can play around with the actual time. I find that for me, 6 minutes works better than 5 minutes after trying it a lot. And what I actually do, now I don't know whether for some people this may be too stressful, but for me it is not. I just have a 6-minute timer going all the time. So what it does is that I do my best in those 6 minutes, and then the 6-minute timer goes. It's a way of actually saying, am I focused on the thing I need to be focused on when the timer rings? And can I reset everything? So it gives me a flexible way of engaging this in these cycles when I want to. So it's like many times you waste a lot of time by just kind of meandering here and there. This is kind of a reminder, a gentle reminder. And I've experimented a lot with the sound that it produces so that it is not too jarring and things like that. So you have to work with yourself and your own preferences to choose something. So it is a sound which I notice, but at the same time, it's not jarring to anything that I'm doing. So it's like a gentle reminder of saying, hey, do you want to look at this? And I can have that running. And so I can engage in these cycles as many times as I want, as often as I want. Okay, so that's just my way of using it. The next problem, I would say, attack the same problem once a day. Many of the problems are very large, and they may not be fully solved in 10 minutes. So you can bring this to bear on the same problem again and again. And especially over days. So it's like you will find that when you come back to a problem, which you have kept aside for a few days, you find that you have a fresh perspective. So you can do that. So you can kind of time yourself saying, okay, this is a problem. I will look at it like at least once a week. I want to kind of take a feel and see where I am, at least spend 10 minutes on the problem. Or this is what I'm going to look at like once a day, things like that. So you can schedule when to engage these on a particular problem. The other point that Kevin was making is that you can bring these cycles to bear on subparts of the problem. Many times, like for example, if I'm saying, okay, how should I expand the meetups in 2021? I have like 4 or 5 different things I'm doing, and I can look at it. I can do Yoda cycles, Yoda-Brainstorm cycles on how am I going to expand, and keep doing that. That's one way. The second, that would be like attack the same problem once a day. I can also say, okay, there are these 5 parts of it. I want to get great new authors. I want to do my own presentations, which are more eloquent, more power packed than what I have done before. Now, these are 2 separate goals. I have three more goals. So I can do these cycles on each of those things separately to zoom in on those things. So and you can go recursively as many steps as you want on the subparts as well. So these are some of the ideas that I could think of. Now, what I want to do is I want to just go through what Joe, Jeff, Eileen, Brian, and Kevin said. I want to recap those things. If anybody else wants to share something, they're welcome to do that. But let me just recap everything. This is a very quick overview, and I want to actually start the breakout rooms so that we can talk about it amongst ourselves and then come back. So let me first recap. Joe talked about realizing that the solutions that he thought were solutions were not actually solutions. And there was a need to think more deeply. It's by looking at the second part, you can say, okay, what is the core problem? And actually discovering the underlying issue. Jeff actually said something very similar to that, after doing this with doing this, people say, is that the real problem that you're trying to solve? And realize that the real problem was something else. That his point about, form follows function, which is one of my favorite principles, core principles. I'm going to be talking about it tomorrow in visualizing philosophy. I have 3 principles. This is one of my first principles, one that I've used for the longest time. And that's tomorrow, Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern time. So form follows function. What happens is that it's very easy to get enamored by forms of particular kinds of solutions, particular kinds of things that you're doing, and never ask, why am I doing that? What is the purpose behind that? Which is a way of getting back to the function, and you change the approach fundamentally, and you actually end up trying to do something, end up doing something which is far greater than what you started doing. Eileen talked about that she was able to kind of make a start on a problem that she'd been working on for 2 years within those 5 minutes, and having that limit of saying, okay, it's only 5 minutes helped. She also made the very interesting point is that even when you don't make progress towards the actual solution, you start the preparation for the solution. So many times it's steps, and that preparation gets you started. So the following cycles allow you to kind of build on that preparation. Brian was initially skeptical. He thought that the method was too simple, but then he came up with the bug list, which is one of the exercises that we had of saying, okay, what are the big problems in your life? And you come up with a bug list for that. And he decided to work on the top 3, whereas for the first 2, he did not get much, but with the third, it did. Now, remember that the investment here is very, very small, like just 10 minutes. So you should expect to fail a few times. You shouldn't expect, that you can move the world every time in 10 minutes, okay? If you can do it 1 in 3 times, that's not bad. That's actually a very good progress, because these are typically the kinds of things that you've been kind of stewing on for a long period of time. And what you would find is that the problems that you can't solve at a particular point of time, another time there would be another time would be a better time to solve the problems. This is like sprints, and to see where you can make progress, and actually making progress wherever you can. And it's very important to I do think it is very important to see this, to kind of employ this method on multiple fronts. So you are just like in a military strategy. You don't have just a single prong of attack. You use multiple prongs. Some of the prongs are going to succeed. Some of the prongs are going to fail. You put more energy behind things that succeed so that you can go further. So this is, think of it as like a parallel, all these parallel problems that you're working on, and you're trying to make maximum progress. Kevin pointed that, if the question is big, then you have to break it down, and you have to make a plan for it and work on the sub problems, which is a great point. Okay, so this is a very quick kind of summary of what people have had to say. So what I want to do now is I'm going to start the breakout room so you can discuss this amongst yourself for a short period of time, for about 20 minutes. Talk about what is it that you learned, share it with other people. Ask yourself, what are the questions that still remain in your mind? And then come back and tell me both your takeaways and the questions, and we'll deal with all of them together. All right, I'm starting the breakout rooms now. Who'd like to go first? Mushki, go ahead.
Hi, I have a very short question. My question is like this: is there a benefit to just sticking to the time limit? Meaning to say, if you get very into it and you want to continue past 5 minutes, 20, 30 minutes, could be a bad thing, because maybe it'll train you to like not keep the habit, to not, we have like the law of least effort. We like to do what's easiest. So in order to standardize the habit, I'm wondering if there's a benefit to literally keeping it to the time limit, no matter how much you're enjoying working on the problem.
What I do and what I recommend is to actually have that I do 6 minutes. So it's like you have the 5-minute timer running in cycles. So you have, when the timer rings, you have a decision to make. You can say, okay, I'm going to spend another 5 minutes on it. So just think in terms of 5-minute units. Try to finish it in 5 minutes, but otherwise you can make a decision to spend another 5 minutes on it. That's how I like to do it, because you have more time than 5 minutes in a day. So that's why that's how I end up using it. I have the timer going all the time, and then so it reminds me that, okay, I'm coming to the end of it. I have I'm finished with 5 minutes, and then I make a judgment whether I want to spend another 5 minutes on it. I don't just let it kind of run, just as much as it needs, because then it defeats the purpose of time. So it's like, so 5 minutes is a reminder of saying, okay, you started by trying to do something. How far are you? Have you been able to do that? Have you decided that you're going to do something? So Mushki, does that answer the question?
Yes. The reason why I mentioned literally sticking to 5 minutes is the idea of standardizing the habits. If I do 5 minutes every day for a week, for 2 weeks, then it becomes a habit. The third week, I'll go for longer, but now it's a habit. If I go 20 minutes, even if it's 5-minute increments, I might not want to continue again the following days. It just becomes like old. You know what I mean? That's.
Okay. I don't know. I mean, what I found was the best way to create the habit is to have the 5-minute timer running. That's what I found. Because otherwise 5 minutes is too short a period of time to be doing it. Because the thing is that the way I see it is that it's a general purpose tool, and the way ultimately, it's like, let's forget about the time when you're trying to train yourself or trying to habituate yourself. How would you like to actually use it? After a certain number of, X number of days of training, I would like to use it multiple times during the day, almost at will. I would say, okay, here is a problem. I'm going to put 5 minutes on it. And I want to be able to do that. So for that, I find the timer to be very, very effective. So let's go with Eileen, followed by Paul. Eileen.
Well, I ended up from our breakout room asking, how do we know, how would I know, I guess, when I'm done stewing and brewing and coming up with something that is worth stopping and starting to take action on?
Okay, that's an excellent question. The Yoda Cycle originally was all about taking action. So I don't see it as being different. The Brainstorm Cycle is saying, okay, what are the possible things? Yoda Cycle is actually, if you can put something into action, that is much, much better than not taking the action. Because the way in which actions work is that they actually change your context. They change your emotions. They change where you are. You're actually making progress. So I would incorporate action into Yoda Cycle whenever possible.
Okay.
Next up is Paul. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, it's really a question, Shrikant, which is a supposed or a possible value of this to encourage a person to break down a problem into smaller chunks, traditional analysis style, so that you take something that you can solve in 5 minutes and you have many of those? Or is that really not an intent of that? I'm envisioning one example quickly is I saw this video of an owl that was tangled up in a line, but I saw them untangle the owl successfully and it flew away. It was beautiful. But they had to decide, in one case, it was deep into the wing and you had to hand pull things out. In another place, you had to use an X-Acto knife. In another place, you could use, so that's a detailed thing. We have to look at each thing, and you could consider it many little problems. The big problem is freeing the owl. So just your thoughts on this process with that kind of situation.
Sure. So ideally, this process is suited for coming up with a solution of, like, for example, to look at this, where the owl is all knotted up. To use another similar metaphor is that of the Gordian knot. Okay, where the people who are not familiar, Gordian knot was this giant knot of a very thick rope that was there in some place. I don't remember exactly where. And it was very, very famous. So people would come and they would try to solve the knot. And that went on for centuries, and it was a very famous problem. And then Alexander shows up there, and they show him the Gordian knot, and they say, okay, so he just takes his sword and cuts through it, and it's done. So a lot of the, part of the 5-minute method is to find things like that. Find solutions which go to the heart of it. And that's really the power of it. But only when you fail to do that, and when you say, okay, you know what, this is actually composed of these 3 things, then, but at every point of time, you're trying to achieve the Gordian knot if you can. So that's the whole purpose of the method, to kind of turbocharge that. Thank you. Great question. Next up is going to be David, followed by Rebecca. David.
So it's a very interesting topic, and it's not what I thought it was going to be. I did miss the first episode. I think I've probably been doing this technique, but not knowing I was doing it the way you're describing it, and not formally with putting a time element on it, because I do know when I'm working on problems, sometimes I will go so long and then I'm going to take a break, and just kind of walk away, do something totally unrelated. And while I'm doing that unrelated activity, get an inspiration to come back or an insight, and then re-engage in what I was doing prior to that. So it kind of an iterative process. And it as I was writing down some notes here, it seemed like that's what you were kind of talking about, that the processor is iterative. You work on a solution, brainstorm what you've completed, evaluate that, take a break, and come back to the solution process, the brainstorming, and go through that iteration, which I find very useful, and intuitively I do that. I just keep iterating on things with breaks. The other thought that came out during our breakout section was your comment about, sleeping on it, which I find very effective for me, which is take a problem, impress it into my subconscious by asking for a solution or asking for insight. And I will wake up early in the morning with insights or realizations of here's how the things go together, or to look at it from this perspective. So I find you're providing an extra little structure now that I can improve my intuitive process and put a little bit more around it. The other thing I found interesting was you picked up on 6 minutes. Which to me is one of those numbers that's actually more meaningful than 5. And the fact that you intuitively feel more comfortable with 6 says something.
I don't know whether that is true, but I certainly find it useful. It just I think it will be different for different people. I want to comment on various things that you said. Fantastic observations. What happens is that I think the way in which our brain works is that actually we do a lot of work very, very fast. And then there is a lot of kind of break in the middle. I see it kind of attention and real kind of thinking happens in spurts for me. And so that's one thing. Second is that going away and coming back is a very powerful process. It is kind of freeing yourself from the entire context that was surrounding you and coming at it fresh. If you're kind of just plodding through a problem, it is difficult for you to separate yourself out from the direction in which you're going and all the assumptions that you're making. So the idea of breaking out, and you're absolutely right, what you're doing is very similar to what is it. The term that I like to use is kind of, working in small glances. So what happens is that in these flashes, you're making progress. You're bringing new things to bear on it. And because the object is the same that you're working on, for example, I do this for writing all the time. It allows you to kind of keep making incremental improvements in all kinds of dimensions that you could not do when you're doing it kind of just straight out, because you would not, because you're focused on something else, you would not be able to focus on other things. Because you're going and coming back, you're able to do that. But excellent observations. Thank you. Next up is Rebecca, Brian, Linda, Mike, and Joe. Rebecca.
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to say I'm really excited to give this a try. I think it's a good methodology, and just the time constraints on it for me are very valuable, to not, go down some rabbit hole, which I can tend to do sometimes. So I'm thankful for the presentation. I think really what I wanted to communicate here is that our group struggled a little bit with the time piece of it, in terms of solving the problem theoretically and then implementing the actions necessary to actually, make changes. And I think, like an example was, one of the gentlemen in our group was talking about how he wanted to have his income to match his expenses. And one of the solutions that he came up was focusing on this web stuff he was working on. But then we started talking, the actual implementation of that plan to do that web stuff is going to be way longer than 5 minutes. So now that we've come up with the solution, the actual project plan to move forward and take action is much broader. And I think that's where we kind of went into, do we divide that into pieces as well? So I'm a little bit unclear yet. And I'm excited to try it. Maybe some of the clarity will come with just doing it. But, the thinking of the solution and coming up with the solution versus implementing the solution still feel a little different to me.
Yeah, that's excellent observation. So it's kind of combination of plans and actions, but actions not as being kind of fully doing everything, but even getting started is a big thing, because that actually changes your context of saying, so for example, when we did this in person, one of the things that one of the guys said, was trying to figure out why is it that, he used to have problems with his energy level, and he kind of tried to figure it out and then said, okay, you know what, this is probably what I'm missing. And he just went and put an order in Amazon and ordered that. So that was that. Now, what happens is that he's not actually taken the medicine. He is not, done it on a regular basis, but the result of it is some action that got something started. So it doesn't have to be the full action, because several things, they take time and you have to wait for those things, but the action gets started. So I definitely recommend an action component, but it doesn't have to fully solve the problem. But having ordered that thing, right, actually puts him in a very different situation than before. So he did all the work, and he has actually done some action where he's now going to actually try it out. So something like that. So it's like, it doesn't have to be full action, but some action that gets you started. And definitely there are problems where you have to do it multiple times. And even on the same problem, you have to do it multiple times. It's a way of kind of concentrating your mind to make maximal progress that is possible in a short period of time, so that by doing this iteratively, you can achieve a lot more. Thank you. Rebecca, great question. Next up is Brian, Linda, Mike, Joe, and Mark. Brian.
Okay, a fairly short and simple comment. From listening to people here and from the breakout room, lots of people, I think, are overthinking this technique, whether it will be valuable to them or not, or start. My advice is just do it. Take a fairly simple problem, do it, try it 2 or 3 times, and then you'll know the answers to a lot of these problems for yourself. You'll know, is it going to be useful? Is it something I want to take further? Just do it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great suggestion. I think all the methods, these are all skills. What we really want to do is to add this to your skill, tool belt that you can bring to bear at any point of time. So don't fret about okay, does this work on this problem? One of the suggestions, what we did, one of the exercises, and folks, if you have not watched, if you did not attend the previous meetup or did not watch that video I would recommend, because that's where I take you step by step through the entire process for 45 minutes, including exercises and everything. So if you want a real example, that's a good example. But one of the things that I did at the end is to come up with this bug list. Okay, so bug list is a very powerful concept. So that means you're not just saying, okay, I'm going to just try this on one problem and see what happens. No. Just like Brian said, come up with a list of problems and try it on a bunch of them. See how it works. Choose some which seem simpler, choose which are different, some which are physical, some which are mental, some which are emotional. So just cover a whole gamut and try it out on a bunch of things and make the observations yourself. And you kind of have to work with yourself. You have to say, for example, for me, it is not 5 minutes, it's 6 minutes. 6 minutes work better. You can say, maybe this works for you better in the morning when you're fresh. Maybe this works only few times during a day, and that's it. So then you just do that. So you have to work with, you have to try it out. Just do it in order to actually see how it works. Next up is Linda, followed by Mike. Linda. Linda, you need to unmute yourself. Okay, next up. Go ahead.
I'm ready. Okay. Thank you for talking about this topic, Srikan. Now I have a book of problem that I devoted each page for each problem. And yeah, I think it's very good when we sometimes keep thinking about the problem, what we didn't put it down. Once we put it down, we got more focus. And I think it's a very good idea to devote 5 minutes, 6 minutes to a problem, because problem is like mosquitoes. We have like thousands of them going around our head, but we don't try to catch one. We try to catch 10 at a time, and we won't be able to do it. We have to catch one at a time. So it's very good idea to devote it just a certain time to solve one problem. Another thing, I want to give feedback on your message for the breakout room. Thank you for doing that. The message is great, but it's kind of small, very little character. That's just a feedback for you.
You mean when it comes into the breakout room, it's difficult to read?
It is very small.
Okay. I have to figure out what to do. I think that's okay. I'll have to test it out. Thank you for the feedback, though.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Next up is going to be Mike, Joe, and Mark. Mike.
Okay. Related to this, Alexander the Great's thesis advisor was Aristotle. And Aristotle is the great-great-grandfather of Occam's razor, which is a variant of this problem, not only in the temporal time axis, but to eliminate in solving a problem the number of moving parts, the number of postulates you have to prove, the amount of data you have to consider. And I've kind of considered this, maybe I didn't do it quite as good as Alexander on the Gordian knot, but to try and get the 30,000 foot view of the problem. And that way you're not you're not solving looking at the leaves on the forest or even the trees. You're looking at the whole forest and what might be hiding in there. So that Occam's razor has been used by a lot of people, from Stephen Hawking to Albert Einstein to Galileo, and of course Aristotle, even though Aristotle lived way before before Lord Occam. And I yield the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mike. Great observations as usual. No, I think it's absolutely true. Kind of looking at things very simply, taking the 30,000-foot view. This is what it is all about, because it's very, like, most of us are too caught up in our problems, and we don't notice many things about them. We take too many things that are around us for granted. This is a way of kind of stepping back, firstly looking at something that you care about and focusing heavily on it, and then saying, okay, I'm going to do this in 5 minutes. So it just throws away all the preconceptions, and your mind automatically starts to look for a simple path. And so it's exactly like Occam's razor. I mean, this is a way of using your mind, of freeing it up of clutter to try to look at try to look for that Gordian knot, saying, how do I cut this? Is there a path? And look for that. Next up, and then again, you follow that up with the brainstorm. So you have not thought of only that one thing, but you have these other backup plans. Next up is Joe, followed by Mark. Joe.
Yeah, I was listening to what Mike was saying, and I actually almost forgot what I was going to say because I was really interested in it. But I guess the one question I have is that this worked with a problem that I had where I had a limited time constraint. But what about the times, so it did work in that particular instance. But what about the times that you, like the example that Jeff had given a little bit earlier when he was talking about voters, and you have a day to do it, and you don't have a day to step away? So is this an effective method when you have constraints like that, where you don't necessarily have the opportunity to step away, but and it is a constraint, and it'll help you come up with a solution really fast, but is it still the best method given a short, there's a short interim between the idea and the action? Sure. that needs to be taken?
Absolutely. Great question. So my answer to that is that you have to develop different ways of taking that break. So taking that break is crucial. What the function of the break is to stop you from being preoccupied with whatever it was that you were preoccupied with, and take a fresh perspective. That's what you're trying to do. There are multiple ways of doing that. So for example, for me, you can do many things. Like, for example, just taking a deep breath. That helps. That itself helps. Doing an activity which is something different, like going for a walk just in your apartment or around the block for 3 minutes helps. Physical exertion helps. For me, I like to sing. So singing, where it changes the context completely. Your entire mind is focused on something else. And then you come back and you're different. And that can happen in a minute. You can do that in a minute. So you have to have all these toolkits. So the principle is the same. The function that you're trying to solve is to break the staleness of thinking and to come at the problem in a fresh way. Sleeping on it is a very effective way of doing that. But there are all these methods of doing the same thing. And you employ all of these depending on the time constraint that you have. So for example, I write for deadlines, all the time. But so even if I have to write it within half an hour, I will have several breaks within it. to make that happen, because it allows me to, when I'm doing, let's say, outline, I want to step back. Then when I'm writing out, before I start editing, I want to step back, because otherwise I will just use the same mindset to do the editing. So things like that. So that was it. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. So do you do use this for outlines that and within your deadlines that you got to create? Okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because that's, I mean, again, it's the same idea that I talked about earlier of shuttling between your analytical faculty and your creative faculty. It's the same principle. Because if you cannot really engage both of them at the same time, so saying, okay, I'm doing the analytical person. Okay, what do I need to say? What are the main points? What are the steps in which I need to say that? That's like an outline. That's all kind of analytical. Then you're kind of letting your subconscious creative faculty work on it to actually produce something. Like if you try to analytically do that, it's not going to work. You need to it needs to flow. And then you need to come back to it analytically and say, did it actually flow well? Did it actually do things well? Can I make it tighter? Can I make it better? And then say, okay, after doing all this thing, does it still flow? Rewrite it if you necessary. So this is a way of kind of using this. Again, it's a question of having time limits, having kind of separation of context. So you're coming at the problem in with multiple angles.
Thank you.
Thanks. Next up, great question. Next up is Mark. Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that it's intriguing to me, the idea of concept of focus and the concept of perspective. And that's an elegant solution to the problem, and how it contrasted with the other way of focusing. So in normal meditation, it's more like a focus on on space. So it's about being focused on your breath or something like that, having a one-pointed focus, but there isn't a time limitation to it. So, but it's a way of concentrating and focusing the mind. Now, in this technique, it's very interesting because it's focusing the mind using the constraints of time, but it allows the mind to cover lots of variables, because it's okay for the mind to work, not just to be focused on one thing, which is sort of interesting. And then the idea of coming back to it. So the way I see it is, you could do as many iterations as you want. As long as you have the time constraint, you created the condition for this focus in time, and then you could revisit it a half an hour later and you could keep doing it, but you're going to still have the benefit of that constraint that you've applied. And there's one more thing. I write poetry sometimes. I used to, and I don't, this technique would be very difficult for me to use, because I just like to think over a problem without any time constraints. But I noticed, and I like, the way that unconscious and the conscious are related, they both are reciprocal. So the daily activities, or the dreams, Freud used to say, were a continuation of the daily activities and the past. But you can also say that today's activities are continuation of the dreams too. There's really they go both ways. But with the poetry, I would always write it on my cell phone, and then I would edit it over and over again, like a week later or 2 days later or a week later, sometimes 3 years later. So I'd always come back to it. And sometimes I have a 5-year or 10-year perspective, and I'd edit it some more. And each time I did it, it would get better from the more time that went by. But I've never really done it with having a constraint of time. So it might be something that I might try sometime in applying it to writing a poem. Because one of the problems I have with poetry is it becomes like an emotional block. And I can see how this could be effective in overcoming an emotional block, because with an emotional block, you tend to perseverate and obsess on something over, and you don't get anything done. But eventually you might, if you stick with the problem. Like what would happen to me is I'll stick with I'll write poetry, and then none of it's any good. It's contrived. And then one day, a week later, if I'm doing this, it just happens spontaneously, and I'll just get a poem that just comes to me a whole in one piece. But it's because of all the work that I did. And that poem that I wrote might not be related to anything that I wrote before, but my mind might be working, poetically because of all that work. So I'd like to apply this technique in writing a poem, because it might speed up the process and help me to get something moving, rather than just plodding over and spending a half an hour, 2 hour, not getting anything done.
That's excellent observations, Mark. I mean, so many interesting observations. I want to say a couple of things. Firstly, what happens is that each person has to kind of figure out how each of us operate and kind of work within that. So one recommendation I have for you is that I've done an entire meetup on this shuttling between analytical and creative faculties, which probably will be more useful in poetry writing than this method. So for that, because that is specifically designed for kind of creative writing or in any kind of writing. So that's one thing I would recommend in addition to this. The second point, it was very interesting. You started with meditation and this one. The time actually does something. Time is a very odd variable. I've always struggled with it. I mean, it seems like the perception of time, of saying that, okay, I need to do this in this much time. In some situations, it actually really focuses your mind to do something, which is, you can almost move mountains in a very short period of time. And if you never ask, and afterwards you feel, well, all it took is for me to say, okay, just do it. And I could do it. What is going on here? What was all this kind of fallow time? And that in this kind of sport, I was able to do so much. But at the same time, I think we kind of have to work with our own creativity, our own habits. So for example, I sing. I don't think I can use this method for singing Indian classical music, because by its nature, Indian classical music is kind of flowing and improvising, but I can use it at the edge of it, in the sense that after having sung, I can kind of look back upon it to kind of say, okay, let me do a 5-minute review of what I did and what I could do better, something like that. So I think it's like, it's a tool. I'm not saying that it will be useful everywhere all the time, but it's a very important tool, and it's particularly effective to shake yourself up from stale thinking or things where you're not making progress, and accelerate yourself. So it's good to kind of master the tool, keep it in your tool belt, and bring it on to any problem you think is appropriate to use it for. Okay, let me make one last comment here. I want to give you a very interesting application of using this iteratively. This is also a tool from this Center for Applied Rationality, and they call it Murphy Jitsu. Okay, so I'm going to just describe it so you can see another application of this. This is a tool for planning. Okay, so think of something that you're trying to do and trying to come up with a plan for it. Okay, so you come up with a plan. So for example, let's say that I decide that, okay, I want to grow these meetups. I want to have, I want to increase the quality of the content. I love it, but I want to increase it twice as good by the end of the year. And I have a certain way of measuring it. I want, so on various things, I say that this is what I want to do, and I come up with a plan to do it. Okay, so you work very hard to come up with a plan. Okay, now here is the method. Murphy Jitsu is based on Murphy's law. If something can go wrong, it will go wrong. So what you do is that after you come up with a plan, and this you apply to things that are important to you. Okay, after you come up with a plan, you say to yourself, like, for example, let's say, suppose I was going to write a book in 6 months, right? I make a plan of how am I going to do it, very detailed plan. This is how I'm going to do it. Put all the effort in it. Once you're done with the plan, you say to yourself, it did not work. It did not work. And you ask yourself, what went wrong? And surprisingly, your subconscious actually will tell you some things. They'll say, oh, that's because you got excited about a particular topic and completely lost track and you just went into exploring that. They'll say, okay, all right, how do I prevent from doing that? So, okay, I say, okay, I have to make a very strict standard of what goes in the book and not goes in the book. And if it is not going to go in the book, I'm going to cut it short, or I'm going to put it for the next book. Okay, something like that. So I solve the problem. Then you say, okay, after having done that, you say it failed again. What went wrong? Then you say, okay, you know what? My work took over everything. And I got, I had to just put in. So I had to put in a lot more work than I expected. And that threw everything off. So okay, so then what can I do to prevent that? So, okay, I make a deal with my business partners to make sure that I have carved out the time that is needed to do this. So I solve that. Then you again say, it did not work. It did not happen. And what happens is that at each point, the subconscious will give you a feedback of saying what could possibly go wrong, because you know yourself quite well, more than you think. And you will keep on getting these things. And you keep doing that until a point you're genuinely surprised. You say, what? How is it possible that I don't do this after all of this? So you keep doing that till then. So again, this is another variation of it, of saying, this is a point about using the Yoda-Brainstorm cycle. Whatever solution you come up with, don't just assume that it's going to work. Consider the possibility that it will not work and work on that part to remove kind of some problems from that, and do this recursively to make a solid plan. So this is another way of kind of doing these cycles on something that you are working on to make it better. So that I just wanted to leave you guys with that. So folks, this has been wonderful. And I really like all the comments. If you have not watched the first original meetup, please go ahead and watch it on 52 Living Ideas YouTube channel. Tomorrow, I'm going to be doing something far more ambitious than this. I'm going to be talking about visualizing philosophy. And I'm going to talk about how I visualize my own philosophy and invite people to comment on that, as well as ask people, how do you visualize your philosophy, and why do you do that? Why do you need to visualize your philosophy? Why do you need to hold your philosophy in a concise enough form that you can bring it to bear on any problem at any time? So that's what's coming up tomorrow. Day after tomorrow, on Wednesday, I'm partnering with a group, in Philadelphia, the Thinking Society, as well as I'm partnering this time with a group in New York on mythology, which has been studying Dante for the past 2.5 years. I tried to get them to study Dante more, and the lady who runs the meetup said, if I do that, I'm going to have an insurrection, so I can't do that. But they're going to come and they're going to be talking about, we are going to celebrate 700 years of Dante, and people are going to be talking about what they got from Dante. So even if you're not familiar with Dante, that's a good opportunity to learn about why are we talking about Dante after 700 years? What is special about him? So that's going to be on Wednesday. On Thursday, we're going to talk about Jordan Peterson's Maps of Meaning. We're going to say, what have we learned from that so far as a midpoint? And on Friday, John will be back to talk about self-improvement. On Saturday, we're going to be talking about art. On Sunday, we're going to be talking about the power of polymaths. And on Monday, Chase will be back, and we'll be back to doing Outwitting the Devil. So looking forward to seeing you at these meetups. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Shrikant. That's a fun schedule.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye. Bye, everybody.